You might have heard there's a new kid on the block in the form of Triumph's Trident 660. Everyone's been telling me on the internet it's a great beginner motorcycle, but is that actually true? Let's find out today. Now, one of the first considerations when you're thinking about getting your beginner motorcycle is how much power the bike actually puts out. This Triumph Trident over here puts out about 80 horsepower, which we here at Yamanoob consider to be about the bleeding edge of what you would want for a first motorcycle. In fact, this motorcycle, as it's sold in most other markets in the world, is sold with a restricted kit, putting out only about 45 to 47 horsepower. Now, why is that? Well, a more powerful motorcycle is just going to be harder and more difficult to manage. It ends up picking up a lot more speed than you're used to as a beginner rider as well. It's why normally when we think about a beginner motorcycle, you think about a small displacement bike like a 300 or a 400, or even if you're unlucky, something like this Gixxer 250 over here. This bike's making all of, I think, 28 horsepower, which is a little pathetic, but it will make sure that you don't get yourself into a hairy situation when you're out on the road on your very first time. Now, while the Gixxer 250 is kind of like the most pathetic option out there for beginner bikes, you can find something like a Ninja 400, which is basically better in every single way for like 3,500 or 4,000 bucks, which is a lot cheaper than 10 grand over here.
The third thing people often consider when they're getting their first motorcycles, I want something really cool, I want something desirable. Well, this motorcycle right here, you can't even get your hands on it now because it's probably still stuck in a boat somewhere in the Suez Canal, and you're not gonna see it for months. Instead, you should be starting on something smaller like the Gixxer 250, but you're also worried about people clowning on you because it's a small bike, it's a nerd bike. But in reality, while we say that stuff jokingly on the internet, anybody who says it in the real world probably has some insecurity about themselves, and that's why they started on a clapped out R6 in the first place. Don't worry about those guys. Get out and get a motorcycle you can get your hands on now. Get out riding and start having fun for a little bit less money. Again, you're not gonna see this motorcycle in dealerships for a couple more months yet.
Fourth point on today's video is the complexity of the motorcycle. Now, when we talk about bikes like the Gixxer 250, a Ninja 400, even something like a WR 250, all those bikes are really simple to work on and to get your hands dirty with. Chain swaps, sprocket swaps, basic maintenance, all these things are easy to find and easy to do on these motorcycles. Now, when you look at something like this Triumph Trident, this is a motorcycle that's based on a much more complex motorcycle. This engine's actually derived from a 675cc race-ready engine, so it's been detuned and decomplicated a little bit, but not that much. You're dealing with electronics, rider controls, throttle controls, all kinds of stuff on this thing that are gonna make it a lot harder for you to live with and deal with as a beginner rider. So in our opinion, stick with the motorcycle that's a little bit more simple to care for and to maintain on the daily. Another point about complexity is that when you're starting out riding a motorcycle, you're there to learn the fundamentals. I know it sounds cool to have a bike with all the fancy tech and electronics and all the latest gadgets and whiz bang, but on your very first motorcycle, it should probably be as simple as possible to operate so that you can understand how to effectively operate a motorcycle before you get all the fun, cool toys on your second bike, which you will inevitably buy.
The fifth issue with this as your beginner bike is you will drop your first beginner motorcycle. And I know what you're saying. No, Spike, I'm not gonna drop it. I'm gonna be super careful. You're wrong and you're lying to yourself. You wanna know how I know? Because I dropped my first bike. Yam dropped his first bike. Everybody drops their first motorcycle. And would you wanna drop this thing on the pavement? Because, man, that would be a painful process. Not only are you gonna ding up this nice tank here, you're gonna scratch up your case covers, you're gonna mess up the levers. This thing is a picture of a motorcycle and you do not wanna do any damage to this thing. Sure, you could put case covers on it, but you're still going to hurt something on this motorcycle when you drop it. It's better to get a motorcycle like that Gixxer 250 right there that you can beat like a rented mule, and it doesn't really matter if you break it because you know, it's a beginner bike. That's just what happens to them. Everybody knows that. So don't run out and spend like $9 grand on a motorcycle like this that's going to be painful to drop. Just drop $3 grand on one that you can lay down in the parking lot on your way away from the sale.
Now, sixth on today's list of why the Triumph Trident may or may not be a good beginner bike is the throttle. Now, as many of you guys know, and as we have championed on this channel a whole lot, the throttle is the most intimate connection between you and your motorcycle. It has to be dialed in just right, and as a beginner, it's the #1 thing you're gonna learn about. So, Spite, why is that bike a little bit weird with the throttle?
So, because they put a pokey engine into what is ostensibly a beginner motorcycle, what they did is they muted the throttle feel so that you don't instantly yeet yourself into a wall, because that would be easy to do on a typical Triumph peppy throttle feel. So what you got is a throttle that's a little bit delayed. It's not like you're going to turn the throttle and then wait a minute for everything to come on. It just, the power comes on a little strange, a little funny. Down low, it's muted and quiet and calm. And then sure enough, you get it up in the revs and it feels like a normal motorcycle. But that first on-off throttle feel is so soft and so just artificially muted on this motorcycle to make it a little bit tamer for a beginner. And it feels really strange even for me, having ridden for 5 years.
Yeah, so a motorcycle like this could actually teach you how to ride pretty well because it is so forgiving. However, when you take those habits from that bike and you jump onto, let's say, an R1 or a Hayabusa or some super high-powered motorcycle, if you're not used to how they snap on the on-off throttle, you can get yourself in trouble. So the point we'd like to make here today is that your first motorcycle is really just a foundation for you to learn throttle control upon. As you progress through your motorcycle life cycle and start riding more and more bikes, you'll notice that each bike has a different throttle feel that you're gonna have to get used to. So as you learn how to ride, you're gonna get better and better with jumping on different motorcycles with different throttle feels. Now, that's not to say that the Gixxer over here and small displacement bikes are perfect when it comes to throttle control as well. This Gixxer actually has a snappier on-off than the Trident over here, but you're gonna be wide open throttle on a bike like this all the time. And if that's what you're used to with motorcycles, when you jump on a high-powered bike and you go wide open throttle on an R1, you better hang on because you're about to go into outer space. So throttle control is gonna be one of those things that, depending on where you start on your motorcycling journey, is definitely gonna influence you as you go on later in life with it. But we think that the Trident over here, with its slightly artificial throttle that's made to be beginner friendly, is actually a point in its column of not being a great beginner bike as opposed to being a good beginner bike thing.
So the last thing that you're gonna notice when you get your beginner bike, your first motorcycles, you get that desire to tinker with your bike. You wanna do something to it. You know, that's why we've got stuff like this exhaust lying here and this crazy suspension off of a Daytona right here. We've also got this exhaust right here because we got a lot of exhaust floating around and handlebars and all of that cool stuff. Well, unfortunately, you're not gonna be able to do any of that with this Triumph Trident right here. It is unfortunately too new for the aftermarket to have caught up. Sure, you can get some stuff through like Triumph's, you know, manufacturer parts, but those are crazy expensive and they're very limited. A lot of people like to say that they got the special exhaust from the manufacturer. It's really no different than a street exhaust because it has to be street legal. You can't get crazy exhausts for this thing, especially not a slip-on, because it's basically one piece. All these new Triumph triples, you gotta get a full system right out of the gate, which is crazy expensive, takes a long time to develop, and requires you to go in and tune this bike. Instead, you might as well just go out and get yourself a normal beginner bike, one that's been out and around the block a couple of times, that maybe already has all this aftermarket stuff on there so you don't have to worry about it. You can just ride the motorcycle. And God help you if I see anybody out there claiming that they're putting their universal Amazon Basics parts, those colored anodized things on there, I will reach through the computer and slap you, because those parts are garbage and they do not belong on a bike this nice.
All right, guys, we hope you've enjoyed this look into whether or not the Triumph Trident is or is not a good beginner bike. We here at Yami Noob have put it in the beginner bike sweepstakes, so we do think that it is beginner appropriate, but you think there's some caveats with that, right, Spike?
Yeah, I feel like we have to give too many qualifiers to outright say that it's a great beginner bike. I think it's, if you're a little bit older, maybe sure, but I honestly believe this is a better second motorcycle. The motorcycle you graduate to. So what you have is your wallpaper on your phone for a little while you're riding around on that horrible little Gixxer 250 getting some miles underneath you. It's no shame to start on a smaller motorcycle and then move to something super cool like this. I think that's probably the perfect progression for this motorcycle.
Yeah, and I think that if you are starting on a smaller motorcycle, don't be afraid that people are going to clown you or make fun of you. Real motorcyclists are never going to say anything like that, and only weird people on the internet who have some weird insecurities are going to post up comments and tell you that you're not cool for riding an R6 or something like that. Enjoy and take pride in your beginner bike, whether it's the Triumph Trident or a Ninja 400, or if you are so unlucky to be on a Gixxer 250, you can also take pride in that. Just take it off some jumps, and it's actually a pretty good hill climbing motorcycle, so give that a shot. But we'll catch you in the next one. Remember, we are giving this Triumph Trident away. Hit the link down below, theyamanynoob.co, and find out how you can get entered to win this motorcycle and several of the other ones we have on offer as well. See you later. Oh, hey, you're still here. I can't believe you made it to the end of the video. Not many people do. Just for you, I have a little treat. Hit this link over here. Check out the next video on the Yamanoob catalog. What's gonna happen in it? I don't really know. Maybe there's a boost in it. Maybe there's some cool wheelies. Maybe there's some fun memes. Probably. Who can say?